Okay, thank you all very much, and let's get to it. We start with the history.
Okay, the history of net neutrality in the last 5 years is a fairly short and simple one. It started with Neelie Kroes in the beginning of 2010, explaining that she deeply loves net neutrality, and in her nomination hearing in the European Parliament, she said that she'd even drawn a little heart next to it in her speaking notes, which is lovely. Then she became less sure about whether she liked net neutrality or not, so then she launched a consultation, and then a consultation, and then a consultation, and then a consultation, and then a consultation. And in the end, she decided that she did indeed love net neutrality, but proposed a regulation with enough loopholes in it to make sure that net neutrality would no longer be possible in the European Union. So she loves it, she thought she loved it, she wasn't sure whether she loved it, and then finally she decided that she loved it and that she doesn't love it. And that's where we ended up in September of last year with the launch of the regulation.
Yeah. First, just a few words about BEREC, the body of European regulators of electronic communications. That's like the European umbrella of the national regulatory authorities. And these guys are quite important for every net neutrality legislation, because it's always the regulator who enforces it and who kind of translates between technology and policy. And BEREC did a really good job because they really objectified the debate. They gave it a lot of facts. They came up with statistics about how many violations of net neutrality there are. And so we have to thank them. But now let's dive into this proposal that Neelie Kroes released in September 2013. Everybody was at this stage unsure in which direction she will lean. And as soon as we saw the proposal, we were certain that this is not a good thing. And to sum it up, there is a nice video from the press conference of the release of the telecom signal market regulation.
Millions of Europeans are affected with our proposal. And what is at stake now is, so you can still choose your two-tier internet. What do I mean with a two-tier internet? Blocking and throttling. This is absolutely a clear language, and it is a guarantee for blocking and throttling. We hurt consumers, we hurt economy, we hurt our strategic future. You get the package, you pay for it. Unsustainable for the sector and unsustainable for our whole economy. Consumers must get the package they pay for it. That is a very open line.
I would add one point, and it's a very important lesson that I think a lot of people here in the Commission and elsewhere learnt from the ACTA debate and the ACTA process, and that is the importance of transparency and the importance of a role for Parliament in that discussion.
Yeah, that was quite dramatic, but that's what it felt like when we started working on this proposal, because we'll come later back to the strategy of the Commission, how well she orchestrated the whole thing. But now let's look into the package. And it is a legislative package, the telecom signal market. It includes regulations, which means binding European laws for all 28 member states on various subjects. This includes the allocation of radio spectrums, the way you can authorize yourself as a telecommunications provider in the EU, regulatory restriction, for example, that the Bundesnetzagentur is responsible for all European subsidizers of Deutsche Telekom, so T-Mobile Austria will be regulated by Germany. And this all boils down to a big market consolidation. In the idea of economy of scales, they wanted to replace the hundreds of smaller ISPs in Europe with just 2 or 3 or 4 big pan-European ones. And the two most important and most discussed parts of this package were the end of roaming charges, and I'm sure you heard of that in the media, and the killing of net neutrality. And those two are connected. The deal the Commission struck with the internet telecommunication industry was, okay, you have to give up roaming charges, but we'll allow you to make much more money in the internet without net neutrality. And let's shortly dive into the parts about not net neutrality that are in there. First of all, it has voluntary internet censorship. So any provider can start censoring websites, services, providers, protocols without a court warrant and without any legal ground, just as a voluntary measure to impede or prevent serious crime, without giving a definition of serious crime, of course. It includes internet fast lanes on the consumer side in the form of specialized services, so that you have certain services where you have to pay more or the company pays more, and then you have a better access than in the best effort internet. And it also has fast lanes on the backbone, so where the internet providers connect between each other. And they included an obligation for paid quality of service peerings called assured service quality. And of course, the most nastiest form of net neutrality violations these days are price discriminations and volume exclusions. So that if you use Spotify, you don't have to pay for the monthly volume you use, but any other provider, you have to pay for the full amount of music or video you stream. And if we look deeper, what's the logic behind all these proposals against net neutrality, no matter if we look in the US, Brazil, or in Europe? It's all, in principle, the sending party network pays model. And these are original slides from Deutsche Telekom, where they explain this evolution of business models in the internet, as they say it.
So we have to say we're very grateful to both Deutsche Telekom and their European association, ETNO, for being quite so clear about what they want, because if they hadn't said it, it would have been difficult to believe. So the way the internet works is you put something online and it's available to everybody. That's what the internet is, that's how it functions. What ETNO called for in the ITU WCIT discussions a year and a half ago, and what Deutsche Telekom proposes here again, is to break apart how the internet functions and do it basically backwards. So the sending party, the website, the search engine, the video service, the music service, whatever, would be the sending party, and they would pay to get access into Deutsche Telekom's network or into France Telecom's network. So the concept is, as the beautiful picture from Deutsche Telekom shows, that they build walls. They build walls that you pay to get access through. They get a new monopoly. They get a monopoly of you as their users. They decide who pays the most to get access to you, and on the basis of that, they develop a new monopoly, and they can charge whatever they want. They can decide which company wins or which company loses online. And with that, they've got a new monopoly. They win in the short term, and everybody else loses in the short term, the medium term, and the long term.
Now let's dive a little bit into the way this all works, and still, again, using their slides from their presentation. This is basically the way the internet works right now. We have users that request content from content providers, and then it runs through the website, runs through the network, and there are agreements for transit, for peering, through which the data flows in the global network, and at the end, it is delivered to the customer. The model they propose is this second faster line, where you have a quality of service, which means nothing else than a better quality, either dedicated bandwidth or less jitter, less latency, some characteristics on the way the data flows, which is better, and which gives them, those services who can pay for the fast lane, an advantage over their competitors. And there's one part missing, which I added here, and these are the specialized services. This is the consumer side of the same model. And here we have a two-sided error, because it doesn't matter if you pay for the Spotify special access or if Facebook is paying for sponsoring your Facebook Zero traffic. In both cases, they want to change something on the access level to give, as we say, unfair advantages to certain parts of the network. And coming back to their slides, that's basically all it is. It's about where IP packets flow, money should flow as well. Now come back to the strategy of the Commission, the way they wanted this thing to go through Parliament. I said before that it was September 2013, and in May, as you may know now, we have the European elections. And European elections means that, normally at January they stop working and all prepare for the elections. You maybe finish the last dossiers that are still open, but you don't have the head and you don't have the time and the resources to really dive into a new complex issue. And even more so if you have a legislative package that is huge in scope and deals with many various and very different areas. So they wanted to use the elections to put time pressure on the Parliament. They added a populist element, and that's roaming. Roaming made sure that this whole thing went through the Parliament at all, because every politician wants to go into the election with the big slogan of ending roaming. And that's the reason why they thought it was successful in the first place. If you look at the law, which we took very intensively, you see a lot of bizarre and complex language, which is not apparent at first. There are many loopholes which are hidden. For example, in the general non-discrimination clauses in Article 23.5, it has a first sentence which is, within the limits of any contractually agreed volume and speeds, a provider should not be allowed to discriminate. And first you think, okay, there are limits on volume and speed, as we all know. But if you look at it closer, you come to the conclusion that outside of your monthly data volume, a provider is still able to discriminate. And the fourth point in their strategy was to always pretend to support net neutrality. The social media communication of the Commission and her spokesperson, Ryan Heath, we have seen in the previous video, was always that we are for net neutrality. We're making sure that no discrimination is happening and no blocking and throttling is happening. That was their line all over, and they were really intense using the internet for making PR around that law. In the press conference in which they released the whole thing, they even gave it a hashtag, connected continent. So I think this was the first law which came with a hashtag. This is the process in the European Parliament, with all the various committees that are involved in drafting their opinion, in voting on this text and refining it until it comes to the leading committee, the Industry, Technology and Research, the ITRE committee, and then it comes to the plenary. And we've basically been working on all those committees, have been working with all the over 1,000 amendments that were tabled in all of these committees by various politicians, all the opinions and reports. We analyzed all of them. Every single change that anybody proposed to the text went through our office. And to skip forward to the plenary vote, as you see here, we won. Which was quite dramatic for us because it was really uncertain how it will end until the final moment. And at the end, there were amendments that repaired the biggest loophole of the proposal, and these went through with the votes from the Social Democrats, the Liberals, the Greens, and the Left. And what's now in this law, which went through Parliament? We got real net neutrality. The principle was ensured. Although the text is still not perfect, we still have to deal with the Commission proposal, and in the final stages only smaller changes were possible because the amendment could not change all of the text in the final stage. And we have, for example, one big problem when it comes to enforcement. At the end, it's up to the national regulatory authority if they want to enforce net neutrality or not. Or at least they could use loopholes to get out of their obligation. And another nasty element, which is closely connected to the plenary vote, is the argument of child pornography. And here we have another video.
I'll explain this.
Yes. Yes, he left.
This makes sure that child pornography is taken off the internet, and as a result, serious crimes are prevented. The amendments tabled by the Left, the Greens and the Liberals, particularly Amendment 243, would stop them being able to do this. This is irresponsible and dangerous, and that amendment must not be allowed to go through.
To stop serious crimes, and Mrs. Ford, and she left, but no, sorry, excuse me, was touching upon, and she was touching upon the child pornography. If there is one issue that is close to my heart, then it's fighting against child pornography. Not acceptable, and I'm pleased that my dear colleague Cecilia Malmström is fighting like hell, and I'm backing her on that issue. Not acceptable in a decent society. So if we are, if there are concerns about opening up to unjustified action against legitimate sites, which, by the way, I don't see as a problem, then the solution is, and that is what I'm just mentioning, to retain Article 23, paragraph 3, on the lawfulness of the information. That way, for horrible things like child pornography that are illegal in national laws, there should be no obstacle to joint efforts to identify and block such sites. We are on the same page, Mrs. Ford. So the new proposal, amendment, to delete Article 23, paragraph 3, should not go ahead.
This vote is the EU delivering for citizens. This is taking the opportunity to get rid of barriers to make life easier and less expensive.
So, this is the moment when I start getting really angry and jumping up and down, because I have never in my long time in Brussels seen anything more shameless and shameful, paradoxically, than this. The European Commission proposed in its legislation that two things. First of all, that nothing in the regulation would make illegal content legal. And secondly, that companies should be allowed to interfere with traffic to, in an unspecified way, prevent or impede unspecified and undefined serious crime. The European Court of Justice recently pointed out in the data retention case that there is no European definition of serious crime. The text on voluntary interferences with traffic was deleted by several of the committees. Each time the European Parliament committees deleted this text, the European Commission said nothing. It said nothing when the Cultural Affairs Committee deleted it. It said nothing when the Legal Affairs Committee deleted it. And then, 2 days before the vote, there were phone calls received by parliamentarians raising concerns that this text, this vital text that the European Commission chose not to mention in the previous 9 months of discussion, was urgently needed in order to protect the fight against child pornography. These rules that exist in a minority of member states, that don't exist in Germany, that don't exist in most countries in Europe, were essential 2 days before the vote. 2 days before the vote, when they could see there was a majority against the position that they were taking, then they decided to start talking about child pornography. Then, just before the vote, the Commissioner was stressing how important, how close to our heart this issue was. And then the amendments went through, and she tweets she could not be happier. This is breathtaking in its awfulness.
How to connect? Yeah. Now that's enough about the Brussels stage. We'll come back to the advocacy we did later. But first I would like to talk a little bit about the campaign we did, the safetyinternet.eu website, which was a coalition of various NGOs from all over Europe, including EDRI, Access Now, Digitale Gesellschaft, Netzfreiheit, La Quadrature du Net, and Bits of Freedom, and several others. We also had a video there, which I will not play, but it's also nice. We did a lot of social media stuff to get this issue out in the open, to make people talk about it. Because net neutrality still is something which is often perceived as too complex, and we wanted to make it really simple. And we also used a new tool, which to our knowledge was never used before in a campaign like that. And we had a fax widget where people could send a fax to parliamentarians with just one click. And this, kind of escalated. We had very, very many faxes that were sent out. And faxes have two big advantages. One, there is no real spam filter for faxes. And the second is that faxes are more compatible to the older generation. Normally, no parliamentarians read their mail. The email is done by the assistant. But the faxes are a different thing. And so we could physically make the voices of the people heard in the offices of the parliamentarian. And their personal document is in paper in front of their eyes. So it's harder for them to ignore what the people want. And to give you some numbers, there were over 40,000 faxes sent by people, because it's not always that easy to send a fax. There has to be paper in the trail. The fax number you're sending from should not be blocked by the parliament, because they realized that they could block all the faxes at one stage, but we were faster, and then we just changed the burner number. And so more or less half or more of half the faxes were also delivered to the fax machines of the parliamentarians. And the safetyinternet.eu campaign was also new in the way that we had the whole campaign website on an open source collaboration platform called GitHub. So the whole source code of the campaign was online and for everybody to edit. And this openness, where everybody could propose changes to the text or the layout of the website, or even translate it, led to the fact that we have Save the Internet now translated in 9 languages. And besides the English version we did, every other 8 were done by volunteers. So this also was a great success in a way that if you make a campaign open and give the tools into the hand of people, then they will make great things with it. Yeah, this is the access map about the countries that visited us and the development graph of the website. And we even built more big coalitions. We had this price comparison website, which had a big right corner net neutrality ad, and even people whom we never expected to support net neutrality. This is a Dutch gay chat. We had no idea that these things even exist, or this company even exists, but for some reason we got an immense amount of traffic from them because they had this big ad on their website. And this all led at one stage also to a natural DDoS attack because we were so popular that our site went down. We just added new capacity and then we were up again. Let's draw some conclusions about the campaign. Why did it work? For lasting effort, you need an educated elite. You need people that really work with the legal text, that work with the parliamentarians, that know the process, that keep track of every amendment that's tabled and kind of translate from this very legal way of looking at net neutrality to a more understandable way. And without, these people are good, but these people alone don't make up a good campaign or a good mobilization. You need grassroots members. You need people who work bottom up, who just find the issue and do something new and creative with it we could never have thought of. So that's also one reason why we try to be as open as possible with the Save the Internet campaign. And at the end, you have to form diverse and broad coalitions. if it would just have been the nerds, if it would just have been the people that are anyway already interested in net political issues, we never would have won this fight. We have big support from other communities. We have big supports from journalism collectives, from economists. So many companies realized this is vital for their existence. And so we had many startup alliances joining us in the fight in Brussels. And as this already goes into advocacy, I now hand over to Joe.
The key thing that we did in Brussels was recycling. There are 5 people in our office. There's only so much that 5 people can do. There are 766, at last count, parliamentarians. There are lots of people in the Commission. There are lots of people in the Council. You can only do so much if you're working directly with policymakers. The trick is, how do you produce information that will allow other people to help you? One of the things that we did was, at a very early stage, we produced a booklet on net neutrality. What is net neutrality? How does it work? What are the key characteristics? What's needed? What's not needed? I've got about 50 of them in my suitcase behind the stage. I want to not bring them back to Brussels. Please remind me at the end. I can give anyone a copy if they want it. Secondly, we produced analysis. We produced information about what everything meant in order to allow people to more easily understand. The Parliament was being pushed into a very absurd timetable, and the staff, the parliamentarians, the policy staff, they needed as much clear, simple, correct, accurate, reliable information as possible. So we produced the analysis at the beginning, explaining what the regulation meant for net neutrality. Every draft opinion from the 4 opinion committees that came out, we produced an analysis of each of the amendments that the parliamentarian in charge was proposing. Each of the 1,000 or so amendments that were tabled in all of the different committees were analyzed, were given a red, yellow, green coding for being good, okay, or bad. And we dropped this all into the laps of the people that needed it. So if they were going to help us, we were going to help them to help us, because we were helping them in their short timetable. And if you were cynical, you could say that the Commission was trying to manipulate the Parliament by giving them a short timetable. But of course, that meant that they needed to reach out to trusted civil society partners more quickly to get the information as well. Access to the online market is crucial for business, particularly for new startup businesses. So we produced a 1-page document to mobilize businesses to explain to them why net neutrality was necessary. We noticed that the European Commission and the ETNO, which is the Association of Europe's Deutsche Telecoms, were contradicting each other and themselves quite frequently, so we produced a comparison document explaining exactly how and when they were contradicting themselves. And as elections come up, there's a lot of tensions, a lot of competition between different political parties and parliamentarians. So we sought to be a little bit more colorful and humorous. So when the parliamentarian in charge, who is not very friendly to net neutrality, produced a frequently asked questions document, we produced a document giving the correct answers to the questions that she was slightly incorrectly answering. And that became impressively viral in the Parliament. Shortly before the vote, the Commissioner Neelie Kroes sent a letter to parliamentarians giving her spin on what was happening. And when we were reading it, we thought, this is kind of lost in translation. We need subtitles to explain what she actually means. So we produced a subtitle version of Neelie Kroes' letter, which similarly found its way around the Parliament faster than we're used to. And we got together with other civil society organizations, with companies, with consumer protection organizations, and we submitted a last-minute paper from all of us to tell parliamentarians this is what we want and this is why we want it. So ultimately, it was all about building tools to help people build to help people to help us. And one of the most shocking examples of this was a scorecard that we did. Most of the parliamentarians broadly were in favor of net neutrality. Yet in the committee, the parliamentarians that would normally be on our side were being quite quiet. And the parliamentarian from the Conservative side of the House that was in charge wasn't really reflecting what we thought the pro-net neutrality position of the majority of Conservatives was. So we took the analysis that we'd already done of the green, yellow, and red amendments, and we did it. Well, Thomas put together this image, which basically showed parliamentarians that what was happening in the discussions among the leading MEPs, members of the European Parliament, was not actually reflecting what they wanted. And like you would think, I would think, that you wouldn't need to tell the Parliament what the Parliament was doing. But these images were produced and sent to the committee, and it had, I would say, probably the most decisive effect of anything that we did during the whole campaign. And I need to say as an aside that our EDRI's new member Access was heavily involved in our analysis of the documents and helped make this change happen. So we gave this information, it was received, it was understood, and the majority began to change in our favor. We obviously, EDRI is not just an NGO in Brussels, it's an association of 36 NGOs from around Europe, including several in Germany, like CCC and Digitale Gesellschaft. We also work very closely with BEUC, the European Consumers Bureau. We worked with the European Broadcasting Union, who obviously have a key interest in making sure that networks are open. And we produced the analysis that allowed a lot of companies to understand why they should be more involved. And we worked with Netflix, the Voice Online Coalition, which is a VoIP organization, Open Forum Europe, Greenhost, and the Austrian Startup Association for Net Neutrality, which grew like a mushroom. It wasn't there one moment, and then thanks to the horse manure delivered by the European Commission, it grew very, very quickly and was very helpful in persuading business-oriented parliamentarians to support our position.
So that's the Parliament, and then sadly, it doesn't end with the Parliament in Europe. Then when you look at the legislative process, you have the Commission that proposes text, then it goes to the Parliament and to the Council, and now we are at the final stage of the Council. And that means that the member states, all 28 of them, now have to decide about net neutrality and about the whole package. And yeah.
So as things stand, a lot of countries haven't been very clear about whether they support net neutrality legislation or not. There are a few countries, France, the Netherlands, and Slovenia, who are, and Luxembourg, let us never forget Luxembourg, who are unequivocally for strong, clear, and enforceable net neutrality legislation. Spain, the United Kingdom, and the incoming presidency of the Council, Italy, are quite strongly opposed. So within the next 6 months or so, there will be a lot of discussion in the Council. The initial round of discussions is currently underway. And then it goes back to the Parliament. The text adopted by the Council goes back to the Parliament. The Parliament, as things stand, the Parliament will then have to vote again, basically. In order for the European Parliament to to oppose the Council in the second reading, they need an absolute majority of all parliamentarians. As things stand with the opinion polls, there will be a significant portion of the Parliament that is anti-European, which means that they will vote against everything, which means that getting a majority to go against the Council, if needed, and uphold the views of the European Parliament and the needs of the European citizen will be a lot more difficult. So on a lot of your chairs, you will have a little flyer for the We Promise campaign. This is a campaign to get people more interested in the European elections, to vote for candidates that support the charter on the wepromise.eu campaign. And it's not a joke, unfortunately. The European Parliament elections are vastly underestimated. We had ACTA, we had net neutrality, we had internet blocking. If we don't do what we can now to get a friendly parliament for the next 5 years, we will have an unfriendly parliament for the next 5 years. So please sign up to wepromise.eu. Thank you. Slight aside, excuse me.
And to also look at what's next, you all may have heard about the FCC rules that are proposed and will be decided upon on May 15. This, of course, could have a big impact on the decision of many countries because the US is still seen as the big brother of the internet. And so, although we have this big goods decision in Europe and in Brazil, who, by the way, also adopted net neutrality legislation, with the FCC decision, it could also go the other way. And this could persuade many countries to fall back in line to what the telecom industry wants. And on the other side, if we could have a more positive approach to European digital agendas, then we could also see this as a competitive advantage. And then maybe more innovation will happen in the IT sector in Europe. But yeah, that's basically it's because we wanted to have some time left for questions. These are the credits for the organization that helped us with this campaign. And I also wanted to thank Kappanet, who is an Austrian ISP, who is also present, and he's the guy who took care of the 40,000 faxes. Yeah. Are there questions? We have a microphone here.
They either understood everything or nothing.
Yeah. There's a question.
Hello, I'm Joku from the University of Helsinki. I was just wondering, you were probably cooperating more with certain parties than others. Which parties would you say that were the most helpful during this process? Because obviously I guess they have the most influence within the parliament, and you can influence the rest of the parliamentarians through these key individuals. So which were these individuals and which were these parties which you cooperated with?
It's not quite as simple as it sounds. Basically, it was the first time that I've been involved in any campaign that there were good friends in every political group. The Conservative group, the EPP, the parliamentarian in charge of the whole dossier was Pilar del Castillo, and she was driving her agenda forward. So it was very difficult. I mean, you can guess whether they would have been more or less helpful, but we didn't have as much direct support from EPP members because with Pilar del Castillo running the show on behalf of the EPP, it was difficult for anyone to be publicly or even privately working in a position, working against what she was doing. There are several extremely good parliamentarians in the EPP group who understand that neutrality and who are doing things quietly. In this particular case, obviously the socialists, the Greens, the Liberals, and even the European group of conservatives and reformists, who are slightly to the right of the conservatives, were all cooperating with us more or less, and we had more subtle communications with EPP.
Okay, thank you.
We still have 2 minutes left. Yeah, another question?
My question would be your strategy for the stages until now was very much lobbying in Brussels and taking support from the member states' organizations. Do you have any plans in incentivizing growth of such organizations in different member states? Because as I see there were very few member states represented through these national organizations. Are there any plans to contact activists in different countries and motivate them to build national groups to lobby their governments?
Well, yes is the short answer. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but 5 years ago, there was nobody at all in Brussels working on digital rights issues full-time. In the last 5 years, EDRI's grown from 1 person in Brussels to 5 people. We've had crisis after crisis with ACTA, with net neutrality, with internet blocking, with various voluntary measures. And we've grown to the size and the credibility that we can run campaigns like this. The next step is how can we help activists, particularly in Central Europe, where there are very few organizations, to give them whatever they need to become more involved with their governments, to get more involved with their parliamentarians in Brussels. And we have a new communities manager part of whose rather long list of tasks will be to identify such organizations and give them as much support as we can.
I would add one thing. If you look at, and I'm myself coming from an EDRI member organization, and my opinion of EDRI was always good, but when I had the chance to work there for 2.5 months on this package, I really realized how crucial the work of EDRI is in Brussels, and that in many topics they are the first and the only line of defense we have for our civil liberties online. Because nobody is watching in the European legislative process, and therefore we need this EDRI office to be the watchdog, to translate from European policy, to at least point the finger where things are burning. And at the same time, we need the member states active. We now have the data protection regulation and the net neutrality regulation, which are both stuck in the council. So without the possibility for national campaigns which are coordinated throughout Europe, we will have a big problem getting the things through that we fight for in Parliament. So these two things tie back together quite heavily, and so the task you are asking is exactly what lies ahead.
It's a lot for 5 people to do, by the way.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Must remember the booklets.
It's a very simple question. Why is it only 5 people?
Funding.
It's about money.
Yeah.
We can't employ people if we don't have money to employ them.
Where does the money come from?
The money mainly comes from foundations. Last year and the year before, we also got money from the European Commission. The European Commission's funding program for 2014 hasn't been launched yet, so we don't know if that's to be relied upon or not.
Have you tried reaching out to all your supporting organizations to double your budget?
Yes.
And what was the answer?
Well, you have to bear in mind that civil society in Germany is very dynamic and impressive. But there are 4 European countries, or 5, that have organizations that have staff, digital rights organizations. Germany, the Netherlands, UK, Poland, France. And none of our other organizations have staff of their own, and they're completely voluntary. So where exactly they can get the budget to give to us is also a question. We're trying our best. We need to be about twice as big as we are. We're doing everything we can to become twice as big as we are.
I think this is a task for the audience then, for all of us.
And we accept donations, there's also a transparency report.
That wasn't the intention of this presentation. Thank you.
Hello, I highly appreciate your work. Maybe just a small suggestion, if you don't know the guys from Lobby Cloud EU, they maybe can be very supportive with the work. Was just another talk here on the Republica.
Yep. We also, of course, have to be careful not to get in the way of our member organizations' efforts. But we can discuss it over a beer sometime. But yes, it's worth looking at.
So if we don't have any further questions, I would say thank you to Thomas Lohninger and Joe McNamee. And yeah, if you have any questions, I guess the 2 of you will just stay for a couple of minutes. Und hier geht es gleich weiter nach einer kurzen Pause. Oh Gott, ich verliere mich heute noch komplett. Mit dem Thema Vorratsdatenspeicherung. Bis später.